Yo, it's me, Pops Fan Marmalade, and you're watching Network. Huh? So come get some CromCon.
Hey, we want to shout out to our sponsors, Daytona Beach Comic Con. If you are a fan of comic books, if you're a fan of comic book conventions, and if you like meeting comic book creators and getting comics and comic-related stuff, then you need to make your plans to attend Daytona Beach Comic Con. This year's show is September 9th and 10th. Silverline will be there, so you should make you there. If you like comics and find yourself in the Orlando, Florida area, doesn't everyone come to Orlando at some point in time to see the House of Mouse? But when you're here, you need to make it a point to visit Coliseum of Comics, especially the one on East Colonial Drive. They carry Silverline Comics, even a limited edition Coliseum of Comics version of our comics. So, when you go, be sure to ask for Silverline Comics and tell them we sent you. OCD stands for Orlando Collector Deviants. OCD, Steve and Trish, they're a family of geeks who promote geek things, particularly those around the Orlando, Florida area. They're big supporters of Silverline, and we think you should be supporters of theirs too. Go give them some love. If you are an independent comic book maker and you need to get your independent comics made, you need to look no further than Kablam Digital Printing. They print our books, and they do a bang Silverline, but many independent. Head on over to kablam.com and see for yourself just how easy it is to have your comic printed by them. And tell them Silverline sent you.
Hi, this is Tim TK, host of That Silverline Show on Tuesday. Join us at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific every Tuesday night as we discuss pop culture.
Barb Kelber, co-host of Silverline's Wednesday Wham. Join us each Wednesday night as we discuss comics, literature, movies, and anything else that may catch our attention.
I'm Roland Mann, and I host Silverline's Silver Sunday. Join me every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern as we make mine silver.
Hello, Internet! Welcome to That Silverline Show on Tuesday. I'm your host, Tim TK, and I'm joined, as always, by David Rios.
Hello.
Jose Fuentes.
Hey, everybody.
And we are also joined by a new addition to the cast, Ron Fortier.
Hello.
And we're still figuring out some audio settings, so there might be some background noise. I might be doing some muting and unmuting as the show goes. But we hope you all enjoy tonight's show. Hopefully we give you a nice reprieve from the chaos that is the current news cycle with the election going on and everything. And instead, talk about something still related to what's going on tonight, and that is comics involve the theme or the concept of America, either as a theme, setting, or just something that's brought up. So this will be new for Ron, but we've all been doing this for a while now. Before we get into the show, we like to discuss what type of media we have been taking in this week, because our creative output often reflects our creative input. So, Ron, I'll open the floor to you. This last week, what have you been reading, watching, listening to, playing, anything like that?
Okay. Excuse me. Reading wise, I've been reading I just finished an anthology collecting short stories from the men's adventure magazines of the 1950s and 1960s. It's part of a publishing house run by a guy named Bob Dice out of Key West, Florida. And he and his partner, Wyatt Dole, for the last 10 years have been shining the spotlight on men's adventure magazines, or anachronism MAMs, if you will, because they were like the interlocking thread between the classic pulps in the 1930s and 40s and what we have today in the market, which is, pulp thrillers, paperbacks, and whatever. And after the pulp died out, after World War II, there was this gap in between where paperbacks were just starting to come into their own. But a lot of these writers that have worked for the pulp started working for these men's adventure magazines. They target veterans coming home from World War II, and they proliferated the market. So Bob and Wyatt collect amazing artwork from these magazines and short stories. And they recently put out a really thick 400-page anthology using one of the iconic titles from the stories for the book, Weasels Ripped My Flesh. And the thing is it's just insane. The stories are ludicrous. I mean, everything from, I spent the weekend with nymphos in Manhattan, and it's just the most ridiculous, insane stuff. Like comics, if you like, action, adventure, thrillers, paperbacks are famous today. This is part of the history of all that, and these guys are saving that.
Nice.
Very
That's
cool.
Okay. Jose, what have you been reading, watching, or playing?
I've been catching up on some Transformers, the new Skybound stories, and mostly just listening to music and working. Really, like my music range is like today was all very much like classic, like 1950s, like California lowrider music. So a lot of like the old classic, cruiser songs and stuff.
Yeah, no, I get that. My music range recently has been interesting. I've gone like full working days of starting listening to just super heavy slamming metal to like ending on big band Soul or like Chappelle Rowan or something like that.
Range.
Yeah. David, how about yourself?
I've been mostly working, trying to get a lot of this stuff done. I did take time out. I did finish the Agatha Harkness.
Yeah.
The Agatha Long series. Found it interesting. Better than I thought it would be. Won't do any spoilers, but
that's that's the kind of the common refrain I hear in the reviews is that it's better than what people expected after like some of the recent offerings from Marvel.
Yeah, well, it's not just a lot of things from Marvel, a lot of things from Star Wars, and a lot of the Disney Plus stuff.
Yeah.
So, as far no games, nothing like that. The only other thing is I tried to carve out a couple of get a couple of books in. I just had jury duty yesterday, and I tried to get some. While I was waiting in the room, I tried to get some reading done. I didn't. It turns out that one of the people that I work with also had that same session, so he came over and it's more of a talking thing. I'm kind of nervous because in those rooms, nobody really talks. Everybody's just quiet.
Right.
So I was kind of worried the whole time that I was going to be one of those guys that, will you please be quiet? But no, it was good seeing him because I worked with him a couple of years ago. He left the company, so it was good to see him. But the two books that I did, actually there's three books that I managed to do. I've been pretty happy with or interested with some of the Mad Cave books. They've been doing, they brought back some of the like the Gotchaman series and some titles like that. I also like Dynamite's been bringing stuff back too, with the Space Ghost and Johnny Quest and things like that. So some of the ones that I did were non-mainstream, but two of the books that I read are kind of they're Mad Cave books, but they are kind of a story that's meant to be a series that you can either read by yourself or you can tie them together. And the first book is this Revolution 9.
Oh, that looks I like that art.
It's kind of think of your Black Widow in the early days. Gets recruited as a young girl and trying to get out. The second one is this that's been released, which is Hour of the Wolf, and this one is a different medium. They're ultimately 4-issue series. The third series has not come out yet. I think it's out this week, which is Exit City. But this one is more supernatural stuff. So this is dealing with like this guy gets a painting, and during the hour of 3 to 4, which is quote the hour of the wolf, it kind of lowers the gap between that dimension and our dimension, and it actually allows kind of pulls people into that dimension. And there's serial killers and stuff like that, supernatural killers, like really weird stuff going on. And then you've got this team and this one guy that basically this team has that 1 hour that they can cross into these other dimensions and solve and try and stop these events that are going cataclysmic events that are going on. So it's going to be interesting to see how that ties in with the other book. But ultimately, it's like there's supposed to be some kind of a big crossover thing that if you choose to do that, once the 4 issues are done, then they will somehow cross over. But so far, it's been interesting. And then the other book that I was looking at that I read was this one, Samurai Knights First Samurai, which is David Dalmatian. I'm sure I'm, Polka Dot Man from Suicide Squad.
Yeah.
But he wrote it. It's one of McFarlane's group Image books, and just started reaching. I'm kind of on the fence on it. I just read the first issue. The second issue is out this week, so we'll see how that goes. Or it was out last week.
Nice. Yeah. I would just see how that goes. I've been really interested in what Robert Dalmatian kind of has to offer since he kind of blew up in movies and also came out as being a huge comic book nerd. So
yeah, he is. I also saw him at San Diego Comic-Con, which was interesting. I went in for a panel, and my wife and I sat down, and we actually ended up being in a horror panel that was right before it, that he was one of the moderators for this. And actually we walked out they gave us the thumb drive, which is for the movie The Substance, which is a gore movie or whatever that he was in or he was involved with. So yeah,
very cool. Myself, reading wise, I've been going back and reading Bleach, the Fullbrainer arc, trying to get, because I never actually finished that when that was going live, so I'm getting caught up to where we are now in 1,000 Year Blood War, which is also my watch for this last week. That and Goosebumps. We've been rewatching the old Goosebumps show.
Okay.
Halloween in our house extends from end of July through most of November. So
a small amount of time.
Yeah, it's small. Yeah, this is a small holiday. Haven't done much else on both fronts because I've been preparing for a convention this weekend. So the other time has been working on cosplays and things of that nature. If you're in Portland and wants to check out KomoriCon, I am the assistant press manager there, so I'd love to see you there. Outside of that, I have been that was A's internet has died.
I can relate to that. Yesterday,
Yeah.
while I was at jury duty, the internet went out at my house, and so
we don't know who won the election, but we know Jose's internet has lost.
But he's back.
Yeah. Playing wise, I started playing Final Fantasy 16, and thanks to kind of having an opening in my work schedule, I have not been able to put it down. So I've already sunk about 20 hours into it and realized I got about 50% of the way through the main story. But the storytelling in that game is phenomenal. Yoshi P, the producer, had made the entire creative team watch through Game of Thrones to take notes on how to do medieval politics. And you can tell they did the assignment right, and that they took all they wanted to, but didn't take everything they didn't need to. Like, they just took the good parts and left all the stuff that was not unnecessary back in the box. So I've been really enjoying
lost
this.
him
Right?
again.
Yeah. Jose will rejoin us when Florida becomes a real state, I guess.
Wow, that was a dig.
Yeah. I mean, I lived in Florida. We can all agree that it's not real. Florida is the liminal space of the country.
Florida is what?
The liminal space of the country, right? It only exists because we believe it does.
I know, right?
Yeah. Okay. So tonight's topic is comics that involve America, either as a theme or a setting. And this can be stuff that's kind of straightforward, right? Like early Captain America, kind of on the nose. That's his whole shtick. He's fighting for American values overseas, right? That whole thing. But also, some of my examples that I'll get into as far as things that are a little weirder are stuff like Undiscovered Country or The Secret History of the War on Weed, which is a fantastic comic by Brian Posehn. I just recommend checking it out. It's hilarious. Visit Kansas with the tourist beaches. It's fair.
I wouldn't go visit our beaches anytime soon.
No,
We
not
just
for
hit
the
hurricanes. That means all the Kool-Aid powder got mixed up. Gave the service.
Okay. Well, I'll open up the floor here to kind of grab some thoughts from you guys. If you think of America being featured in a comic as a setting, as a theme, do you have any strong examples that immediately come to mind, or that you have like a strong attachment to?
Yeah, my first thing that popped to mind was G.I. Joe, a real American hero.
I like where your mind's at.
That was one of the things. Transformers and G.I. Joe were my early 80s and stuff. So yeah, definitely strong attachment to that.
Well, I'm reading comics back in the 50s. Okay. So again, talking, post World War II, my take on that is that I remember war comics.
Yeah.
That was pretty much done by, the returning veterans came back to DC and timely. There was no Marvel at that time. And we were getting a lot of war comics. I mean, DC was leading the pack. You had a writer like Robert Conager, a veteran, and he's working with Russ Heaton, Joe Cooper, and they were doing things like Our Army at War, which gave us Sergeant Rock, okay? And I mean, dozens of great war comics. And I can remember, 10, 11 years old eating that stuff up. But when, I found out what the theme for tonight's episode was, the other one that came to my mind was DC broadened that horizon by doing Tomahawk, which even, at that age, I realized, okay, this is, the pre-colonial days, French Indian Wars, all right? And here you get this, guy with a coonskin cap playing Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone, running around, fighting, the good fight. And it had that historical background to it. So those are the two that I remember fondly, as a young comic, collector that, work on that theme specifically. But then again, you go back to the 80s, And the other one plays off the name itself, and that was Howie Chaykin's little satirical look with American flag, all right, which basically said, okay, you know, what is this country all about? And it's commercialism, buddy. It's what can we sell and how much can we get for it? And that's a shining example of twisting something on its head and playing the satire. It was a brilliant series.
For me, so as Tim knows, I've always been a fan of like gothic horror and the idea of bringing it in America. I read every book. So for me, I would say American Vampire. I think the art was done by was it Raphael Albuquerque? But that I liked it because it spanned several like time periods. You know what I mean? Obviously, it was like the Old West. It was like the idea of a vampire, like American vampire, as opposed to like the European, like I don't know, noble-esque vampires. You have a cowboy vampire, and that just resonated with me on so many levels because I'm a huge Western fan. I'm a gothic horror fan, and just put them all together. But like the book itself, actually, like had several storylines that like bridged into like was it like 1800s and then was it 1940s Hollywood and just like hitting like several major points in history that these vampires have existed and keep having like interesting stories in it. So like, and I mean obviously it's in the name America too, but yeah, I like the idea that it wasn't just set in one aspect of America, one era of America. It bridged into several, and you can see that in the art style, and you can see that in just like the art and the story.
Definitely. Have you read through the Golgotha books yet?
No.
I'm going to keep reading them up, but they're the Gothic Western set during the sorry, just my setting his nose eyes rather dark. Okay, there you go. They're the Gothic. That's just my video settings. They're the Gothic Western set in Vegas during the Gold Rush. It's it's a small town that is where all of the monsters and cultists and creepy crawlies kind of hide in America during this boom time.
Nice. That's a comic book or a book?
It's a novel series, so it's a trilogy. But it follows a kid who has an eye blessed by a Chinese medicine man, a sheriff who was hanged but came back. His deputy is a Pawnee kin to coyotes, and as well as a madame who is the heiress of a League of Assassins, while a cult of the old gods is trying to enact some sort of macabre ritual in this town.
Well, thanks, Tim. Now I have a new set of books I'm going to read.
No, it's a really fun book. It does also feature some American history in there, albeit it's kind of more on the dark, mystical side of it, but also covers some of like the superstitions at the time and kind of talks about like what if these superstitions that were very active were actually real, which I think is always a fun idea. Which is
right.
I kind of mentioned earlier that my first two things that come to mind when I think of America being featured in a comic are newer stories. Just because they have a little bit of recency bias, but also I think they explore the topic of America in a really new and interesting way. One is Undiscovered Country by Scott Snyder and Charles Soule, with art by Giuseppe Camuncoli. And it is a weird kind of double fake out. It's in the near future. America has isolated itself from the rest of the world, has gotten no contact for so many years. but a disease is starting to ravage the rest of the world. So a coalition of other countries comes together, and they get contacted by someone inside America saying, "We have a cure. You guys just need to come in and get it." And when they go in there, they find that America has kind of fallen apart into 3 or 4 different mega factions. Runs the gambit of being post-apocalyptic to almost like a technological dictatorship to everything in between. So it's interesting how it kind of covers a bunch of pillars of the American zeitgeist, right? The rugged freedom and individualism kind of gets covered in this Mad Max style section. And then the influence of technology and progress is like this weird cyberpunk, Borg, like network brain type country, right? And you're kind of seeing almost like an outsider's eye on just if these values or concepts were just entirely monolithic in a very fun science fiction backdrop. The Secret History of the War on Weed is exactly what it sounds like. It is just it's a parody comic of what would happen if you deployed a Rambo to like gentle weed farmers in Colorado.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's a really interesting because it actually like it's co-written by Brian Posehn, so there's moments that really actually breaks down like the politics of the war on drugs and the economics of it, as well as like kind of how you can backtrace different things. But meanwhile, you're watching this guy who just looks like Duke Nukem with who ends up becoming a double agent for weed. Not for a cartel or a dealership, but just for the concept of weed.
For weed.
Yeah. So that's a very silly and almost satirical. On different ends of the satire scale, you have the deep, serious, dark satire, and then you have the very silly Monty Python style satire. That's kind of the 2 things that come to my mind immediately. I also kind of liked how we've kind of talked about this because we've kind of covered it like a brief overview of the history of comics, because America is deeply tied into the history of comics, kind of starting out in, we can go to the history in like the 1800s and that one like collection of like pages and stuff. But realistically, as the comics industry as it does that, we understand like it starts like in the 40s and 50s, booms. We have the slowdown, 60s and 70s, comes back up in the 80s, all that fun stuff. But I like how we talked about how each era almost had like a different American influence into it. With Ron talking about World War II and like the war comics, and just media in general at the time being not quite American propaganda, but definitely there was like everything's very chipper. Like the American, the idea of America was much more positive in everyone's mind. Whereas now it's very confused and split. No one knows what exactly America means anymore.
Well, another one along that case. Along that case with the one I think of is like the Rocketeer as well, with Dave Stevens and his stuff that he did. The very American home, home feel and everything. They even talk about it in the movie. It's like, well, I may be a mobster, but I'm still an American. So there's a lot of that too that I really enjoy along those. But it is.
I mean, Rocketeer is nostalgia to the max, without a doubt. All right. I mean, Steven was a fan of all the early Republic, Saturday afternoon serials and King of the Rocket Men and all those things. I mean, I'm not that old yet, but anyways, I can remember seeing some of these as a kid in the movie theaters as they were dying out. And what we're talking about here is basically, like comics being a mirror of society, all right? And I mean, you can basically walk into a comic shop and start picking up comic books, and you pretty much identify the era, as Tim was saying, of when they were written, when they were produced, when they were done. And they give you a feel. And I totally agree with what you're saying, Tim. There was a much more assured footing of where we were in the 20s and 30s. And then the war comes along, and comics do become propaganda, very much so. I mean, Captain America, Uncle Sam, Wonder Woman with her red, white, and blue outfit and all this good stuff. So, yeah, they were used as propaganda. But then you come back after the war, and you have this ambivalence. Now we get the crime comics, or we get the horror comics, and you don't know who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, and whatever. And that seems to play itself out, through the 60s and 70s. So, where we are right now, I consider, yeah, exactly. There isn't a defining philosophy of what this country is. I think we're pretty much at a nexus of where we're heading, and I think the diversity of what we find in titles today pretty much reflects that.
Yeah, I kind of to what David is talking about there. One of my favorite moments in comics was from the Marvel DC crossover, where the Joker realizes that the Red Skull is a Nazi, and he immediately turns on him. I'm a psychopath, but I'm not. But I'm American.
All right.
Something I kind of also wanted to talk about here that I have a bullet point on, and things like particularly Marvel comics, but Action Comics, we're just because they all took place in a fictional city, right? For if you've read Marvel, you've read at least 5 storylines that take place in New York. Whereas
1 year, right? In 1 year, all takes place in New York.
Yeah, exactly. I don't understand why anyone still lives in New York at this point, but yeah. You also have comics that have a more creative take into they do a fictional city inspired by a real city. So something like Metropolis and Superman, Gotham and Batman, which, by the way, are not the same city. I feel like if you've been in the comics discourse, you know that. But for those of you who may be fresh into comics, Gotham is, in fact, New Jersey.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also kind of in the more recent years, more recent being 80s onward, there's also the rise of like a West Coast influence with West Coast Avengers, Runaways, thanks in most part to our forefathers at Malibu, who helped contribute to sort of the rise of West Coast themed comics. So we've kind of talked about, I'm going to have to mute the background noise again. In previous episodes, we talked about the pros and cons of having something that's set in reality versus taking more of a fictionalized approach and the liberties afforded there. Imagine, having a realistic New York, then the readership if readership goes in to buy the comic at the corner store bodega, like it used to be like on the spinner racks, and they see Spider-Man fighting someone outside like 56th and Main, they immediately recognize that block and they're like, hey, I know that. That's cool. Whereas in Metropolis, you get more freedom and so like this block design makes no sense, but I'm going to put a bank here, even though like the sewers are beneath it. But we need to have Crocodile come up somehow. So I'm going to grab some opinions from you guys, and just in terms of as it relates to telling a story that feels American, are you more a fan of having the real city, or do you do you think you can reach the same feel by having a city that feels effectively American or effectively real without necessarily being that same city?
Well, most of the writings I've ever done, I've basically used fictional cities, basically, concentrating more on the plot and the characters, and not that much on settings. But then again, one of the characters that I've done for almost 35 years now the whole idea of the character was to set him in a smaller urban setting and a real one. And I chose Portland, Maine, and created a character called Mr. Jigsaw, Man of 1,000 Parts. And it's a comedy superhero, and he's terribly naive. And so part and parcel of the story was that he was born and brought up in Rockport, and he's got this superpower, which is absolutely silly and ridiculous. He breaks apart like a jigsaw puzzle and then pulls himself back together again, okay? And he's on his way, the open story, he's on his way to Boston, because that's a metropolis, and that's where he's going to be a superhero. And events happen in the story where he gets sidetracked by a female reporter from the Portland Herald, and realizing that he's really a naive high school graduate, she convinces him to go to Portland instead and maybe try out his superheroing career there first before the big city. The fun of that was basically driving up. I created a character when I was still in New Hampshire. And so I spent a lot of weekends with my camera and maps and everything else, and had an artist who actually lived in Honolulu, Hawaii, and sent him all this reference material. And in my scripts, I would set out certain parts of the city, parks, or whatever, to make it authentic, to make it real, to get that feel, because the setting was part of the story. Now, the flip around with all of this is I'm currently writing a Western. It's my first Western ever. And dealing with that it's such a broad canvas that I might pick up one or two authentic cities. But the fun of writing a Western is to just make an iconic Deadwood, all right? And something in my own imagination that's and plunk it down in Arizona someplace. And as long as I get the general feel of the locale, the fiction works just fine. So there's both sides. It depends on what you're driving at as you want to get across in your story.
I feel that you have to stay true to whatever you decide. What your choice is and how you want to go with the story you'll dictate obviously where they're from in that. But in cases where you are using a real city, then like you mentioned, you want to go through and pull individual landmarks that kind of binds the reader to the reality of the environment that they're in. Because if you say, oh, well, this is New York, and you don't show anything or give that feeling for New York, you get a certain detachment from the user at that point. Where are you from? Well, I'm from California. I don't really know much about New York. I just decided to say that they're from there. So it's, at least you owe it to, at least research or, know the area and, bring that familiarity in. But on the flip side, if you're, like Ron was saying, if you're going through and creating all these fictional cities, then that aspect of it gives you a whole lot of room to play. You can create your own mystique for this town. The personality of the town, maybe the town is a town where the corrupt, everybody's corrupt, politicians and everything. So you're dealing with a, they're going to get you better get them before they get you type atmosphere. Or you go through and, maybe you're doing more traditional, like you're saying, than the Western, maybe there's that more of that kind of, innocence of, a new land and, that type of thing. You can factor in, how, you're dealing with, Indians, depending on what your time frame is, and, or, the banking industry, however you want to set all that up. You have a lot of room to play with, and you can really create some cool ideas and drive your storyline based off of your location. So I'm a good fan, but of both. But you need to pick your medium and excel in that direction. try not to go in the other direction.
Well, I'm a fan of, like I said, of fantastical settings. You know what I mean? Like Dave said, you have a little more, a lot more actually options to just be more elaborate, be more fantastical. You know what I mean? In the settings, even if you're doing a western, you can take liberties as long as, like, say you're doing a western, you want to make sure there's weird west stuff now. So now you don't even have to like just make a set in one little genre. You can like kind of bridge into others, which is pretty fun. But I know, like, in regards to, like, say, like running an RPG game, you know what I mean? If I want to set in a specific setting, I will definitely do the research to pick specific things. Even if I don't get all the streets right, you know what I mean? You want to at least pick up main spots. Like I ran a game through Indianapolis, so I made sure I got the Scottish Rite, which is like this big giant church in Indianapolis. You know what I mean? Everyone who lives in Indianapolis knows where that's at. You know what I mean? They know what it looks like. They know that if they just turn to their head, they can see the spires from the church just like just skyrocketing. So you do a story, you want to make sure it includes things like that. If you do a setting, you want to pick, depending on how much of that map you're using, at least 5 or so key points, key locations, so people can that are read. Oh, this is set in Indianapolis. Oh, dude, I know where that's at. Like, oh, heck yeah, that's cool. You know what I mean? That they incorporate that into a story. Like for me, if someone wrote a setting in my area, I'm gonna, when I flip through the book, even just background stuff, I'm gonna try and find something that I know that I recognize in my area that's in that book. So
yeah, I feel like I'm in an interesting place with that because 2 of my 3 publications so far take place in London, and my 3rd takes place in space. So I kind of forget it being like very set in like a historical city that had some very tight history attached to it, especially these specific times, World War II and the Victorian age. And then space, which is just go ham, throw things at the wall, see what happens. But I find that when you're writing something that takes place like in a fictional setting, you almost have to double down then on the cultural aspect of it, right? Because you need to have the culture make sense for what it's based off of or what it's tied to. And there are some exceptions to that. You can have like things that shift a little bit. Example being Metropolis is definitely more on the positive emotion side of New York. I haven't really. It hasn't been a big point of someone yelling, "Hey, bub, I'm walking here" to Superman when he's walking out of the phone booth. Mm-hmm. But Gotham definitely ties into the darker thoughts of like Atlantic City and New Jersey that like a lot of people have like their mental connotations with that area, and made these parts of the culture made more monolithic than they are in reality. And I find that the case, like with an example being like West Coast Avengers, or in LA or in Venice Beach, right? You definitely have the staple parts where like this is like the Venice Beach beer, or like we're over at like outside like Apple Records, things like that, where they definitely use landmarks to tie West Coast Avengers to a place. But when they're doing stuff where they're going cross country or they're like in the Badlands or places where they can do more fictional settings, they tie more into kind of the laid back, chill like atmosphere of West Coast living, where they're living out of a van. There's like used pizza boxes kind of left throughout. Hawkeye's wearing like shades and like crushing a can of soda, where like it ties more into the cultural association with West Coast living as opposed to the actual like physical placement. Ron, you're muted.
You just tickle my fancy. I remember I was stationed in California when I was in the Army for 2 years, Fort Ord and Carmel. And so ultimately, a friend of mine who was brought up in Oakland told me a story once about the fact that during Christmas, he and a bunch of guys got in a pickup truck while they were in high school and drove up to the Sierra Madres, apparently, up to where the snow was, and they packed the back of the pickup truck with snow. Drove like crazy to get back down to the school, where they were at in Oakland and literally had a snowball fight before it all melted. Okay.
Nice.
So I ended up writing a story for Megaton Man about that little incident. I incorporated it in the story, and I set it off with one of these, Salvation Army Santa Clauses standing on a street corner in Oakland in Bermuda shorts, and Santa Claus in Bermuda shorts ringing the bell. Okay, going back to what Tim's saying. Another point with this is hate lazy creators. All right, I mean, years ago, I can remember being in a comic shop and looking at new titles coming out, and there was a superhero comic just debuted that week. So I pick it up and I open it up, and the first thing you see on the splash page, all right, is this cityscape with people walking in the front, and the background, and I'm sure you've all seen this, okay? It's just the line. It's just like the square lines of this is the background, right? And you know what the caption reads? Washington, D.C. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I mean, is there a city in this country that doesn't have so many, memorials and buildings and everything else that are recognized by every kid in this country growing up from 5 and 6 on? And this artist gives me little squiggly lines in the back and says Washington, D.C. Close the book, put it back on the shelf, all right? Come on, people. I mean, if you're a creator, regardless of fiction or reality, do your homework or get creative.
Yeah.
I mean, on top of that, it's our nation's capital. I mean, I've walked most of it. Good gravy. There's so much.
And it's the Washington Monument. He couldn't even be bothered with that.
The monument, the mall. It's so much stuff that you can like put in the background, just make people just, oh yeah, that's freaking DC.
Yeah. You can even get cheeky with it and do something like everyone's expecting the big showcase monument. You could get cheeky with it and show like the Washington Park parking center, someplace that everyone knows, everyone hates, and be like, this is your mental association with it.
Right.
Yeah. But just do something to tie it in. To that, one other comic heavily features America that I really like is the Department of Truth, and also dealing with like American conspiracy theories, which is it's super fun. But they did an issue set in Denver, Colorado, and so of course the monument they showcase is Denver International Airport because of the amount of conspiracies involving the hidden rooms and the unused buildings and that. So they the showcases that, and then they do a dive in and you see the weird apocalyptic mural that's on the wall at Denver Airport. Which if you haven't had a chance to see it, it is insane to me that that's an airport mural. But yeah, having a real place to tie into, if you can, it does so much of the heavy lifting just showing one or two monuments as your set dressing, as your interpiece. And if you're using a fictional place, really look at kind of what kind of city or kind of place you're based off of and what your mental associations want to be, and really make those things pop as much as possible. Like Metropolis, forward thinking, optimistic, things like that. So they have a ton of skyscrapers and all the settings are super bright, and that's your set pieces. So you're going to be doing research either way. It's just, do you want to do real setting research, or do you want to do psychological association research? And hello to Pops from Madness Comics Network.
Well, I mean, what David was saying earlier, I mean, even if you're creating a fictional city, all right, give some thought to its background.
Yeah.
All right. Like who founded it. You may never use it in the story, but if you've worked that out in your mind, then it's going to play well to how you create that city, what the monuments are for a fictional city, of what culture developed it as it went along. Those things just start to fall in place like pieces of a puzzle. Like we can, you can just add one or two pieces, but they identify that background in itself, and then it just enriches the whole tapestry of what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, that's there's actually a method picked up from advice for dungeon masters and Dungeons and Dragons, which I feel like also applies to just developing any sort of fictional setting as like a good base to expand from. It's called the guards method. Government building, underworld activity, altars, resources, defenses, and a social hub.
Yep.
And if you can get an idea of at least one building that matches each of those categories, you're going to get an idea of how they interact and what other things need to be where to make that all kind of make sense.
Well, I gotta throw something that you're probably gonna think I'm crazy, but think of one thing I think of is if I think of Dukes of Hazzard, and I think about the fictional place and the way that the county is set up is it's all around Boss Hogg. How he would do it. So if you think about it and you go, okay, well, if I'm going to go and I'm going to take Boss Hogg out of it, naming him per se, if you take that character himself out of it, the entire theme that's based around his character is still all present in Hazzard County. The Boar's Nest and stuff like that. All the pieces are there. So this is kind of what Ron was talking about is if in Dukes of Hazzard they had never actually brought in Boss Hogg himself, then there was enough of his influence and his handprints on it that it was a thing going throughout, and it added a lot of weird, bizarre, rich history to the county. So it's definitely had that effect. So that's what I was thinking when Ron was talking.
The character. Holy, you can make the setting a character. All right. Yeah.
So I guess kind of talking about now, moving on to our last point that I have written down, and that is American comics as their impact both on American pop culture as well as pop culture internationally. Comics are not, just an American thing. Comics are made internationally. Every country has their own industry. Like one of my favorite genres of comic is like French Euro comics. I love the way they do storytelling and that kind of slow burn. But when it comes down to what America is really known for, that's our media exports. Comics have actually been almost kind of like an unsung hero in terms of interconnectedness. Both internally, like everyone knows the Hulk. Like it doesn't matter who you are. At some point, you have heard a Hulk reference, something like that. You probably have heard of Spider-Man. Internationally, even before American movies really got shipped everywhere, American comics ended up in other people's hands, kind of as a result of one, military exchange and leaving the hands of GIs, especially during the Korean War. There's a lot of comics being like brought back and forth and got dropped off or handed around. But now, with them being a major publication, online access, it's even more of a talking point, almost like a point of interconnectedness. As an example, there's a British rapper who passed away not too long ago, MF Doom. And of course, his entire personality is based around Dr. Doom, right? His stage moniker, his mask that he wore was all based around the personality of Dr. Doom.
He used musical clips, intro music clips from like the old Dr. Doom cartoons and stuff like that, Fantastic Four cartoons, and used them incorporated them into his music as well. I personally am not a big fan of his work. I know it sounds crazy, but
you're more of a Wu-Tang guy.
I really am.
I know it's the weird. If you're a fan of comics and rap, you either align more with RZA or MF Doom. I found that's like a really weird divide. No one said it had to be a thing; it just happened. But even in Japan, we have this weird full circle moment where American comics influenced Japanese manga, influenced American comics, influencing Japanese manga again, where the creator of one of the most recent like explosive anime manga series, My Hero Academia, based it off of his love of Marvel Comics.
Really?
And so I kind of want to grab some of, I guess, your thoughts on how important comics are for the American personality or the American culture, both internally as well as on the world stage. Like using comics as a jumping off point for, I mean, we're not going to bring about world peace with a back issue, but it at least gives you a talking point if you find someone who shares the same interest if you're like at a bar somewhere in Germany.
Are you saying that if Bill and Ted had a comic book instead of music, then they couldn't achieve world peace? Come on, Ted.
Maybe it's the same part of it where if Bill and Ted brought comics with them, maybe they won't have the whole fight with death in a second.
So you're saying that manga was influenced by American comic books? I know it's the other in more recent years.
Mhm.
A lot of, like, I want to say recent years, but like what 90s on and up till recent, you know what I mean? A lot of that manga influence in regards to like art style and just technique was brought
Yeah.
into like American style comics, and it's like so a lot of the artists, I feel anyway, a lot of the artists now, that's the style that they're looking for. I mean, I see a lot more of the Eastern style of art used in comics as opposed to Western style art.
Yeah. It's really interesting because it almost it's really weird how it worked out, because it's the rise of manga is actually tied to the rebuilding of the Japanese economy. So this is the we're gonna say it. Comics saved Japan after World War II.
Comics saved Japan from Godzilla. Gotcha.
Yes. So Japan already had the idea of like illustrations and kind of visual treaties dating back to like Sengoku Jedi, right? Like they would like have they would draw up panels of their stories, but it'd be kind of the same way as like the Greeks did, where they'd be like a one-off, and you put it either around a vase or like on a tapestry or something like that. Japan would maybe do like the triptych, where it's like a string of tapestries telling a story.
Right.
Or they do like a small leaflet showing like proper hand form on something. However, it wasn't refined as we know manga is today. However, then comes 1945. We established a permanent military presence in Japan and force open permanent trade relations. And part of that is entertainment and media, because anyone who's like studied any sort of geopolitics knows media and culture is like the best weapon used in any sort of diplomatic relations. So a lot of Marines there stationed in Okinawa would have comics with them. The comics were sold at the PO. And we also just shipped over comics, books, movies, anything you could to Japan in order to incentivize purchasing items back and forth. And so these people who were kind of short form novelists at the point saw comics and saw that like, oh, this is a different way of doing the same sort of short form novel work. And then it creates the whole mangaka system where these individual novelists who would do like publications together instead now also start hand drawing their own illustrations and create the first manga like in the 1950s, late 1940s, early 1950s. And then that ends up growing and goes in a different path than American comics did, because it's not a direct one-to-one copy of it, but it's an industry that's grown as like an offshoot. Whereas in American comics, we encourage the team system. And if someone is the writer, artist, inker, letterer, and seller, like that is like we consider them to be entirely prolific, way too busy, and they are overworking themselves in the space. In Japan, proper mangaka is someone who does all those things all at once, but they don't have a coloring system. They don't really color comics there. And then that ends up creating its own growth pattern, which is different from comics. So when manga reaches maturity, like in the 80s, 90s, and then American comic creators are seeing those and like, oh, this is really interesting. That's a different. It uses traditional Japanese storytelling techniques because it comes from their novel industry, but it's visually compatible with the language we've created in comics because it's based off that same visual language. We reverse engineer that, and you end up getting some Japanese influenced comics in the 90s, and then they get shipped back to Japan. And Japan's like, oh, this is more akin to some of our storytelling, so we're going to take this and start putting that into more of our manga. Or now what they're doing is they're doing something similar to a complete edition, where like in America you'll do like what someone completes an arc, especially if it's like a huge tie-in, they'll release the hardback, which is like affects Spider-Man 1 through 6, Spider Family like 4, 5, and 12, whatever. Now in Japan they'll do a complete edition, which then they'll hire someone else to go through and color it. So Japan is starting to adopt a little bit of a team system by hiring an outside colorer to do manga after they've seen American comics be colored for so long. So it's this very interesting back and forth on how the comics have sprung up entirely new. American comics specifically directly inspired like an entire set of industries, because anime came from that, right? And then anime conventions and cosplay, all this stuff came from the rise of manga. So American comics are directly, like, factually, there's proven ties there given to the rise of manga and the anime industry and all that.
That I discovered through some friends of mine who traveled to Japan, and some of the things that, you know, what you were talking about earlier about the comics and the GI influence in Japan. I know for a fact my dad was stationed in the South Pacific during World War II, and the USO got literally thousands of American, you know, comics from the various publishers, and would give them out to the GIs all across the islands. And it just happened in Europe as well too, because they were easy to carry, you know, put them in your back pocket or whatever. And so, yeah, they get to Japan right after World War II. Now, the kicker is, back in the early 60s, I had a good friend who was a lawyer and worked out of Washington, D.C., and would travel to various countries for the State Department. And he was a huge comic book collector and fan. The kicker is, though, that when he traveled, he would literally hide his comics in folders. Okay, now think of what we're talking about here, right? He's like one of the leading economic lawyers in the country, and he's on a plane bound for who knows where, representing the States of America, and he's hiding the fact that he's reading comics. Now, he goes to Japan in the mid-'60s, and when he comes back home, we get together one day, and he starts telling me it's a whole different atmosphere. And I'm like, to what effect? He goes, they appreciate the storytelling aspects of comics, of visual storytelling. So much so that they were incorporated by the entire Japanese society, including adults, where we're still in the 60s dealing with the fact that comics are for little kids. Adults shouldn't be reading comics. Whereas he traveled throughout Japan, and it was nothing for him to be on the train and watch businessmen, doctors, lawyers, or whatever reading Japanese comics. Like he said they use them for everything. If you bought something that you had to construct yourself in pieces, you know, early IKEA or what have you, right? It came with comic books.
Yep.
It wasn't blueprints, they were comic books. They just understood and appreciated the form of storytelling provided in panels and sequential panels. And it would take us, you know, Stan Lee and you know, into the 70s and 80s and get to the college age before, you know, we started to say, okay, comics are legitimate and, you know, they're an actual storytelling medium that should be respected for what it is. But by then, well, as you said, manga's going, wild and crazy, influences American creators, right? And then you come along with two guys working in a pizza parlor in Dover, New Hampshire, who absolutely love manga and Kirby, and meld the two and give us, Teenage Mutant Ninja, Turtles, and we go back and forth like this. All right. Now I'm working, for Silverline right now. I'm doing a science fiction series, and I'm working with an Italian artist whose entire life history is growing up in, this European cultural mode of, Renaissance art and whatever, and his using the the panel storytelling form is so much more delicate, I want to say, and refined. Mm-hmm. And there is a definite feel to a European approach to comics than we have here in this country. So it's absolutely fascinating that every country adds its own little bits and pieces, cross the ponds, and everybody gets influence, and suddenly we've got whole different kinds of forms, growing from, which I think is wild and great.
Yeah, I mean that's the comic I just put out, Wolf Hunter, working with Canadian colorist, and we both have a love of French Euro comics, so we pull that palette into a story set in England, telling an American style spy story, like planes, trains, on wheels, and very fast paced action. So it is that exact the comics themselves serve as their own kind of cross melding and sharing of cultures, and it's really interesting how kind of it'll coming from where it started. Okay.
And you can tell it, Ron, in Andrea's work, you can tell the European, obviously, Italian and whatnot, that style of art for his work is different than American style. I think it's beautiful. And just seeing the detail he puts in, simple lines still convey quite a bit of detail in the story and in the book itself.
He's got a point of view that isn't overly influenced by TV or cinema. All right, it's a very artistic point of view, which most American graphic artists have grown up in this country, again, saturated with television, movies, and whatever. And you see that cinematic boom right there. Okay, the camera's straight on shot and points of view or whatever. But with Andrea, that's what I'm saying, you've got that cultural background. Who knows, how many museums this guy went through growing up as a kid, and what he saw, saw in traveling, and dealing with other European artists from Spain, from Portugal, from Germany. And they do have that really delicate line, which I absolutely love, and their perspective. I mean, I write a script and I never give, direction to that point of just basically, here's what's happening. It's your view. You're the storyteller, the visual storyteller. And his page is just absolutely breathtaking to me.
I agree. I've been looking at him recently. I've been looking at him. So, just going back over the issues that I have, and just it's gorgeous work. It really is.
Well, with fingers crossed, we'll see issue number 4 shortly. It's done. It's being lettered right now, and Roland's got the covers going. So I'm kind of hoping that maybe another month or so we'll see that out. And it's a 6-issue miniseries, so that's 4. We're getting close to the end. I've finished the scripts, and it's all a case of how long it takes Andrea to wrap it up and get the last 2 issues done.
Well, I think you said issue 4 that's the one that's getting lettered right now. I'm actually doing one of the covers.
Oh, is that right? Excellent. Terrific. All right. Yeah. I'm anxious to get it out. And so's Andrea. I mean, we're having this discussion about, this whole idea of different cultures, but the world has gotten so much smaller. Okay. Thanks to technology and the internet, right? And Andrea and I cross paths on social media. I mean, that's basically it. He posted several pages of his artwork. I saw it. I flipped out of it, thought it was absolutely fantastic. Left him a couple messages and told him how much I loved his work. And the next thing you know, he's writing back to me and saying he's familiar with yours truly and my career. And would I like to do something with those pages? Yeah, well, hey, didn't have to ask me twice, right? It was like, yeah, totally. He sends me a short outline of what he had in mind. I fleshed it out, developed it, and brought it to roll, and there you go. That's Beyond the Stars.
That's awesome.
Okay. Well, that has been all the bullet points I prepared. We are approaching our last couple minutes here. So I'll open up the floor. If anyone else had any other thoughts, questions, things they wanted to cover for tonight's topic, there'd be any chance to.
America is great. We have amazing eras in our country's history, and American stories to be told in every single one of them.
Well, I tell you, I'm a diehard patriot anyways. I'm a veteran. I love comics. I have since I was a kid. Like jazz, is an American invention. Sequential storytelling, comic books are an American invention that saved the world, and I'm damn proud of that too.
Heck yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you everyone for watching. Next week, we will be back with a topic and a tab that I have already closed, so let me pull that back.
Those are my favorite when Tim puts himself on the spot.
Yeah. It's also interesting because I'm switching over to contacts again. But I developed astigmatism since last time I wore contacts, so I have like the weird like torque lenses that have like the bend in them, so they like will shift around on my eye. So while I'm still getting used to them, I just occasionally look at my screen. It's just nothing but blurry lines.
Just go get Bionic.
There goes Tim. I think it's here somewhere.
Yes. Next week, we'll be talking about how to make your first comic and sell it. So this is going to be a topic for if you're just coming out of school or in school and want to get started in comic history. Not just how do you make your comic, because you're going to find a bunch of tutorials on that, but how do you make one with the knowledge that you're going to try and take it to market, whether that's through publisher, self-published, or any one of the multitude of options available to you today.
All right. Hey, before we sign out, I want to thank the three of you for allowing me to sit in. I really enjoyed this. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I look forward to doing it again next week.
Well, thank you for joining us. I like, it's always great to get all kinds of different perspectives on things. And I can honestly speak that for me and the other guys, we wouldn't have thought about the era, the 50s era's comics, and a lot of the coming back from the war and all that. We wouldn't have. I don't think we would have mentioned anything like that. So thank you for bringing that unique perspective as well. So.
Absolutely.
Oh, you're welcome. I mean, when I, talked to Roland about doing the show, Roland said I need an old guy there. So.
He's saying, Hefe? He's saying I'm not old? Come on, I got gray hair. It counts.
Yes.
That's cool. I'm glad you're on.
No, we're glad to have you. It's definitely great having you on. And this is a little bit of telling how the sausage is made before I go off the air. We run a quick ender here, at which point the live show cuts off. We still go back into a kind of like a end of show green room type thing, where sometimes we just chat after the end of the show, but you don't have to leave as soon as the end card comes off, and also you don't have to stay if you don't want to either. So it's up to you. All right. Well, thank you, everyone who chatted with us live. If you listen to any podcast service around the world after the fact, and want to join in the conversation like Casey White and Pops did tonight, you can go over to YouTube or Twitch.com/Silverline Comics and join in the live conversation. We appreciate you leaving reviews, comments, likes, sharing with a friend. It really means a lot. We will see you next week and hopefully give you some advice on how you can get your comics to market if you're just starting out in this industry. But until that time, make mine
Silverline.
Hey, I'm G-Rod. Make mine Silverline. You heard me.